The aroma of roasted chicken and the easy laughter of family dinner filled the home of the Millers, a beacon of peace in the quiet neighborhood of Willow Creek. 15-year-old Jamal Miller, finishing his homework on the porch, barely registered the approaching siren until it screeched to a halt directly in front of his house. Two police cruisers, lights flashing, painted the calm evening in a sinister tableau. Officer Brandt, a burly figure with a reputation for aggressive patrolling, and his junior partner, Officer Reyes, stepped out, their faces grim. Jamal, a bright, respectful teenager with aspirations of becoming an architect, felt an immediate knot of dread. He knew this feeling that IT wasn't about safety. For more gripping tales from the hidden corners of justice and beyond, subscribe to Dark Side of Luna, where the shadows hold the truth. Jamal Miller, Officer Brandt's voice boomed, cutting through the twilight air. We've had reports of suspicious activity, possible drug dealing, loitering. Matching your description. Jamal frowned. Suspicious activity? I'm just doing my homework on my own porch, officer. And I've never dealt drugs in my life. His voice was steady, but his heart began to pound. He knew this drill, the casual accusations, the thinly veiled intimidation that often followed when officers like Brandt patrolled their predominantly black neighborhood. Brandt scoffed, stepping closer, his hand resting on his service weapon. Don't play innocent with me, kid. We know your type. Always got something to hide. He eyed Jamal's new sneakers, then his backpack. What's in the bag, son? Looks a little bulky for just homework. Maybe some contraband. He gestured to Officer Reyes. Reyes, run his name. See what comes up. Jamal's parents, Sarah and Justice David Miller, hearing the commotion, emerged from the house. Sarah, a calm but formidable woman, stepped forward immediately. Officers, what is the meaning of this? This is our private property. My son is a minor, and he's doing nothing wrong. Brandt barely glanced at her. Ma'am, we're conducting an investigation. Your son matches a description. He's being uncooperative. He then turned back to Jamal, his eyes narrowed. I'm going to need to search that bag, and maybe your person. Unless you want to come down to the station. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. Better cooperate, son. Things go a lot smoother when you don't fight us. Your kind usually learns that the hard way. Jamal, despite his fear, met Brandt's gaze. He knew his rights, thanks to countless conversations with his parents. Officer, he said, his voice clear, you do not have probable cause to search me or my bag, and you cannot detain me without reasonable suspicion of a crime. If you persist, I will call my legal counsel. Brandt let out a derisive laugh, turning to Officer Reyes. Legal counsel. Hear that, Reyes? This one thinks he's a lawyer. Probably watched too many TV shows. Look, kid, you're not going to bluff your way out of this. You call anyone, and I'll make sure you regret it. He then deliberately reached towards Jamal's backpack, his intention clear. Jamal, though visibly tense, stood his ground. His mother, Sarah, stepped directly between Jamal and Brandt, her face etched with quiet fury, but her voice remained steady. Officer Brandt, she stated, her tone cool as ice, cutting through the mounting tension. I suggest you reconsider your actions. You are harassing a minor on his own property without cause, and you are speaking to the son of a man who takes constitutional rights very seriously. She then looked over her shoulder just for a moment into the darkened living room where her husband, Justice David Miller, had just emerged, tall and imposing, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. His presence alone seemed to change the atmospheric pressure. Justice David Miller emerged from the shadows of his living room, a commanding figure even in his casual attire. He walked with a quiet dignity, his gaze, though calm, holding an undeniable weight of authority. He didn't raise his voice or rush. He simply stepped next to his wife, Sarah, and looked directly at Officer Brandt. Officers, Justice Miller stated, his voice a rich baritone, clear and steady, you are on my private property, harassing my minor son without probable cause. My wife has already informed you of your errors. Allow me to reiterate. He reached into his pocket and slowly pulled out a small, elegant leather wallet. He opened it, revealing not a driver's license, but a glint of gold and the unmistakable federal seal. I am Justice David Miller. Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Officer Brandt's face drained of all color. His eyes, fixed on the gleaming Supreme Court badge, bulged in disbelief. His hand, which had been resting confidently on his weapon, twitched and fell limply to his side. Officer Reyes, who had been standing a step behind Brandt, visibly recoiled, a low gasp escaping his lips. The air, already thick with tension, now crackled with absolute terror emanating from the officers. The man they had just tried to intimidate, whose son they had called a type, was one of the 9 most powerful legal minds in the entire nation. Supreme Court. Justice. Brandt stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak, all his bluster evaporating. He looked from the badge to Justice Miller's calm, unyielding gaze, then to the unblinking faces of Sarah and Jamal. I didn't know, Your Honor. My deepest apologies. We were just responding to a report. A misunderstanding. He began to babble, his words tumbling out in a desperate attempt to explain away his catastrophic error. Justice Miller held up a hand, a silent command for quiet. A misunderstanding, Officer Brandt? Or a pattern? His voice was low, but each word resonated with the weight of law and history. This neighborhood, officer, has seen an inordinate number of suspicious activity reports in recent months. An alarming number of young men, particularly young black men, matching vague descriptions, subjected to unwarranted stops and searches. Is this your personal initiative, officer, or is this being directed? Brandt swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically. No, Your Honor. It's just how Captain Sterling wants things. He calls it community outreach and proactive patrolling. Says we need to clean up certain areas, show a stronger presence to deter crime. He's got charts, quotas even for stops and arrests in these zones. He desperately threw his captain under the bus, hoping to mitigate his own immediate peril. We're just following orders, Your Honor. It's department policy. Justice Miller's expression remained calm, but a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. He exchanged a knowing glance with his wife. Department policy, he mused, the words hanging heavy in the air. An interesting claim, officer, especially when that policy appears to systematically target specific demographics in clear violation of established constitutional rights. He then looked directly at Jamal, who stood tall beside his mother, his earlier fear replaced by a quiet strength. This is not merely about a report, Officer Brandt. This is about institutionalized harassment. And tonight, you just brought it directly to my doorstep. He stepped forward, his imposing presence seeming to dwarf the officers. I suggest you and Officer Reyes immediately leave my property. And then, I suggest you prepare to answer for your actions, and for those of Captain Sterling, before a much higher authority. Leave my property, Justice Miller repeated, his voice firm, unwavering. Now, Officer Brandt, utterly humiliated and terrified, could only nod, his eyes wide. He fumbled a quick, pathetic salute and, grabbing a visibly shaken Officer Reyes, practically ran back to his patrol car. They sped away, siren silent, leaving the Miller family standing under the twilight sky, the air still thick with the residue of their raw encounter. But for Justice Miller, this was just the opening salvo. He didn't make a single call that night. Instead, he spent hours in his study, a legal fortress of books and meticulously organized files, his mind working with the precision of a master strategist. He wasn't simply reporting a bad cop. He was dismantling a system. By morning, his first move was a confidential, encrypted briefing with the United States Attorney General and the director of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. He laid out the incident, Officer Brandt's desperate confession about Captain Sterling's quotas, and his own profound concern that this was not isolated misconduct, but a direct, unconstitutional policy. The subsequent federal investigation moved with unprecedented speed and secrecy. What they uncovered went far beyond Captain Sterling. Sterling was merely a loyal enforcer for a much larger, more pervasive scheme orchestrated by a figure considered untouchable, District Attorney Robert Maxwell. Maxwell, a charismatic politician with aspirations for higher office, had systematically influenced police strategy to manipulate crime statistics and maintain political control. His office had a notorious conviction rate initiative that secretly incentivized certain types of arrests, particularly for minor offenses and disorderly conduct, predominantly in low-income, predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. These arrests, often based on flimsy pretexts, bloated Maxwell's conviction rates, allowing him to boast about being tough on crime and secure funding for aggressive policing units. Units that, like Brandt's, were then explicitly directed to target specific communities. The true goal, to create a manufactured sense of chaos in these areas, justifying heavier police presence and, paradoxically, depressing voter turnout among demographics less likely to support Maxwell's political allies. The connection was chilling. Captain Sterling's quotas were merely the street-level execution of Maxwell's grander political agenda. The department's official reports conveniently overlooked the disproportionate targeting, classifying the arrests as proactive community engagement. As the federal investigation quietly closed in, a desperate internal crisis erupted within the district attorney's office. An administrative assistant, Maria Sanchez, a quiet woman who had worked for Maxwell for 2 decades, had been deeply troubled by the conviction rate initiative. She had meticulously, secretly, copied every memo, every email, and every whispered directive that detailed Maxwell's true intentions. She saw the human cost of his ambition in the faces of the defendants who streamed through the courts. Families destroyed, lives derailed. When news of a federal inquiry involving a Supreme Court justice's family began to circulate, Maria knew her moment had come. She contacted the FBI, delivering an unredacted trove of evidence. Audio recordings of Maxwell berating his staff to find more arrests in those problematic zones, explicit instructions to reduce plea bargains for specific types of arrests, and a hidden ledger detailing the financial kickbacks from private prison lobbyists to Maxwell's campaign, which directly influenced the conviction rate initiative. The stakes became astronomically high. Maxwell's network was vast, extending into every corner of city politics and law enforcement. Threats, subtle at first, then increasingly overt, began to filter towards Justice Miller's team, hinting at dire consequences if they didn't back down. Jamal, witnessing his father's unwavering resolve and the terrifying reality of the forces they were up against, decided to act. He began quietly documenting similar instances of harassment in their neighborhood, gathering testimonies from friends and neighbors who had been victims of Officer Brandt's proactive patrolling, adding the human element to his father's legal pursuit. The family, united, was no longer just a target. They were a formidable force for change, ready to confront the corrupt system that had thrived in the shadows. The revelation of District Attorney Robert Maxwell's sprawling network of corruption, fueled by Maria Sanchez's courageous whistleblowing and buttressed by Jamal's meticulous collection of community testimonies, had armed Justice David Miller with a legal arsenal. But Maxwell was a cunning opponent, deeply entrenched. He began a counteroffensive, subtly leaking misinformation to sympathetic media outlets, attempting to paint the federal inquiry as a politically motivated attack orchestrated by a liberal Supreme Court justice. Anonymous threats against Maria Sanchez resurfaced, and even Jamal noticed unfamiliar cars lingering near their home. Justice Miller, however, was prepared. He coordinated with the U.S. Attorney General and the FBI Director. They weren't just seeking arrests, they were aiming for a public, undeniable dismantling of Maxwell's entire operation, a clear message that no one was above the Constitution. The operation was launched on a Tuesday morning, precisely when District Attorney Maxwell was giving a live, televised press conference from the steps of the courthouse, ironically, announcing a new community policing initiative meant to rebuild trust. As Maxwell lauded his office's commitment to public safety, 2 unmarked black SUVs screeched to a halt behind him. Federal agents, led by a calm but determined Justice Miller, poured out. District Attorney Robert Maxwell. Justice Miller's voice boomed, cutting through Maxwell's prepared remarks, amplified by the live news microphones. You are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and gross abuse of public office. The live cameras swiveled wildly. Maxwell's face, moments ago radiating confidence, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He tried to flee, but agents quickly secured him. Simultaneously, teams of federal marshals descended upon police headquarters, arresting Captain Sterling as he barked orders and locating Officer Brandt, who was found cowering in a locker room. The entire corrupt chain, from the streets to the highest office in local law enforcement, was being severed in a single, coordinated, utterly public blow. As Maxwell was being led away in handcuffs, still visible on live television, he screamed, "This is a fabrication, a conspiracy." Maria Sanchez is a disgruntled employee, a liar with a criminal past. He tried to publicly discredit his key accuser, hoping to sow doubt. But Justice Miller had anticipated this. He stepped to the microphones, holding a single, official-looking document. Mr. Maxwell claims Ms. Sanchez is a liar. What he fails to mention is that Ms. Sanchez, fearing retaliation for her courage, underwent extensive polygraph examinations, passed with flying colors, and her testimony is corroborated by irrefutable digital evidence that has already been verified by federal forensic experts. He then gestured to the FBI director, who held up a small hard drive. This includes, among other things, a hidden ledger detailing financial transactions between Mr. Maxwell's campaign and several private prison corporations that benefited directly from his conviction rate initiative. The revelation sent shockwaves through the national media. The public, witnessing the direct, undeniable evidence and the immediate, public refutation of Maxwell's desperate lie, saw the true depth of the corruption. Justice Miller, the man whose quiet strength had been tested on his own porch, now stood as a towering figure of justice, ensuring the truth could not be silenced. The battle was far from over, but the war had decisively turned. The city and the nation watched, stunned, as a deeply entrenched system of injustice finally began to crumble. The dramatic, live televised arrests were merely the preamble to the grand symphony of justice. The overwhelming evidence, meticulously compiled by Justice David Miller's team and courageously brought forward by Maria Sanchez, left no room for doubt. District Attorney Robert Maxwell, once the city's golden boy, found his political ambitions and personal freedom dissolving under the weight of irrefutable truth. The trials were swift and uncompromising. Justice David Miller, temporarily stepping away from his Supreme Court duties, testified with the gravitas and precision only a jurist of his stature could command. He laid bare the unconstitutional machinations behind Maxwell's conviction rate initiative, exposing how it systematically disenfranchised and criminalized entire communities for political gain and private profit. Maria Sanchez, transformed from a timid administrative assistant to a fearless whistleblower, provided chilling, first-hand accounts and undeniable digital proof of Maxwell's directives and his dealings with private prison lobbyists. Jamal Miller, standing tall and articulate, shared the poignant testimonies of his neighbors, illustrating the devastating human cost of the city's corruption. The verdicts resonated across the nation. District Attorney Robert Maxwell was convicted on all counts, including conspiracy, racketeering, and gross abuse of public office. His sentence was a resounding testament to the severity of his crimes, signaling a new era of accountability for public officials. Captain Sterling and Officer Brandt were also found guilty of civil rights violations, misconduct, and perjury, receiving significant prison sentences. The private prison lobbyists involved faced their own indictments and legal consequences, unraveling an entire ecosystem of corruption. But the justice extended far beyond individual convictions. Under immense public pressure and guided by Justice Miller's unwavering commitment, the city embarked on a comprehensive, systemic overhaul. The district attorney's office was purged of corrupt elements, and its conviction rate initiative was permanently abolished. The police department underwent a radical transformation, instituting rigorous anti-bias training, community-centric policing models, and establishing new, transparent oversight committees empowered to hold officers accountable. Thousands of unjust arrests made under Maxwell's tenure were reviewed, leading to the expungement of records and substantial reparations for those whose lives were wrongly impacted. The very neighborhoods once targeted by proactive policing saw a resurgence. Community trust in law enforcement began to rebuild, citizen engagement in local politics soared, and the funds recovered from Maxwell's illicit gains were reinvested directly into schools, youth programs, and genuine community development initiatives. Justice David Miller, The man whose quiet dignity and profound adherence to the Constitution had been challenged on his own doorstep became an even more revered figure. His personal ordeal transformed into a monumental victory for civil rights, inspiring a national conversation about police accountability and judicial integrity. He returned to the Supreme Court bench, his unwavering gaze a constant reminder that no one, regardless of power or influence, stands above the law. Jamal Miller, deeply impacted by his father's courageous fight, went on to pursue a career in civil rights law, ensuring that future generations would never face the harassment his family endured. The Miller family, stronger and more united than ever, stood as a living testament. Sometimes, the most unassuming figures wield the greatest power, and true justice, though often delayed, will ultimately prevail against even the darkest forces. For more gripping tales from the hidden corners of justice and beyond, subscribe to Dark Side of Luna, where the shadows hold the truth.